Hey guys, welcome to Mad Scientist BBQ. I'm Jeremy Yoder, and today we're doing an experiment. We're going to find out if seasoning your barbecue the night before is helpful or just a waste of time. For a long time, I've seen people describe how they like to prepare their barbecue. A lot of times what they'll do is the night before, they'll take their brisket out of the package, they'll trim it up, they'll season it, they'll put it in the fridge, and then the next morning it will go on. The reason behind this is because they want the seasoning to penetrate deep into the meat, so therefore they have maximum flavor when that barbecue is served. Now, a couple things we have to get out of the way first. Those really large particles like granulated onion or granulated garlic or dry mustard powder or black pepper, they don't actually penetrate into the meat. Those are just surface treatments. Salt, however, because it's an ionic compound, because it splits apart or dissociates into its two constituent ions, it can penetrate deep into the meat. That's why brines are effective. So what we're going to test is whether or not seasoning it the night before actually helps with the salt penetration versus seasoning it just before it goes on the smoker. Now, my reasoning has always been that it takes so long to cook a brisket. For me, it usually takes about 14 to 16 hours, that the salt will have plenty of time to penetrate deep into the meat, to diffuse through the meat. Also, when you consider the rate of diffusion is going to be dependent on temperature, it's going to diffuse faster at higher temperatures. During the course of a whole cook, when it's at a high temperature, the salt will move through the meat more quickly than when it's just in the fridge. I thought there's no real purpose when it comes to barbecue to season your meat the night before. Steaks, on the other hand, are a completely different story. Because they cook so quickly and because you don't take them, to 200 something degrees, you usually take them to a medium or a medium rare, something like that for most people. The salt doesn't have time to penetrate all the way through the meat, and so it's kind of left on the surface. And so especially if you have a nice thick steak, it's very helpful to season ahead of time. So the night before, or maybe 24 hours or even 48 hours before, I've seen that have a big difference versus a steak that's seasoned immediately before it gets cooked. So the question we're examining today isn't with steaks, it's with barbecue. If you cook something at a low temperature for a long time, does the salt have enough time to penetrate the meat? To test this out, we have kind of two methods. The first is I have some pink curing salt. Basically, this is sodium nitrite, and what it does is it retains the red color of the beef that we're going to be cooking today. So if you had pastrami, even though it might be cooked to 200 degrees, guess what? The inside is still red because this sodium nitrite actually bonds to the myoglobin that's present in the meat and forms something called nitrosyl hemochrome. That's not super important. What is important is that we can visually see how far that salt penetrated before the meat was cooked to well done or turned brown. So what curing salt does is prevents the meat from turning brown when it gets fully cooked. So that's going to be an easy visualization of how far this sodium nitrite was able to penetrate. Now, some of you might say, well, sodium nitrite isn't exactly the same thing as sodium chloride or table salt. You know what? You're right. The rate of diffusion might be different. How it interacts with the meat might be slightly different. So to address that, I'm going to be seasoning with just 50-50 salt and pepper like I do on all barbecue meats. And we're going to treat it just like regular barbecue, normal barbecue conditions out there in the smoker. We're going to do everything like normal. And in order to test how far the salt penetrated when this is finished cooking, I have some Salinity Test strips. So we can test different parts of the meat to see how far the salt penetrated. So worst case scenario, we're going to see how far the salt penetrated before cooking with the sodium nitrite, the curing salt. And then with the Salinity Test strips, hopefully we're going to find out exactly what happens when you treat barbecue like you would always treat barbecue, have a salty, regular salt rub, and put it on the outside and cook it for a long time. So in order to test this, I got some great quality meat from Porter Road. It's almost a shame that we're going to use it for an experiment instead of just eating it. One of the reasons why I wanted to do just a regular barbecue rub on one of these is because the meat looks so darn good that I'm going to have to eat one. I'm not going to eat one of the ones that's just covered in curing salt, but we're going to eat the one that's with salt and pepper. It looks so good. I'm going to turn it into a pot roast. I'm going to smoke it for a while, and then it's going to be awesome. So wish you guys could taste that. I'm sorry you can't. I know I will, and I'm going to be very happy about it. So what I have is I have one of these roasts that was seasoned 2 days ago with the curing salt, one that was seasoned yesterday with the curing salt, and one that we're going to season with the curing salt right now. So we're going to have those three to compare to each other. And finally, I'm going to season one of these with just salt and pepper immediately before it goes on the smoker so that we can get a good test of the salinity inside the meat. Now, these roasts are going to be thicker than most briskets, so if it penetrates all the way through one of these roasts, we know for sure that it's going to be okay on briskets. Let's get those last two roasts ready, and let's get them all on the smoker. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind while we're doing this is that when that red meat hits an internal temperature of about 165, whatever level of penetration that sodium nitrite or curing salt has made, it gets locked in place, because when the meat turns brown, it turns brown for good. It doesn't matter if you cover it in sodium nitrite. So we have to keep that in mind when we look at the results at the end. But I think that even after it hits 165, salt can continue to penetrate. And so we have the Salinity Test strips, and we're going to be testing that out on the one that's just seasoned with salt and pepper. But to get a really good visual, we're going to use that curing salt. We're going to cook this at 250 degrees. We're not going to focus on the cook so much because it's not really about the cook, it's about the salt penetration. But we might do an update in a couple hours just to see what the meat looks like. But ultimately, it's about how far that salt gets into the meat, and we're going to check that out when this is done. I want to take a chance to thank today's sponsor, Porter Road. Them sending me this meat really helped me out to be able to do a video like this. And I've been using Porter Road meat for a long time, for years at this point. They always deliver great quality stuff. It shows up at your door and it's incredibly convenient. Porter Road is an online butcher shop that delivers high quality meat directly to your door. They offer a wide variety of dry aged beef, pork, chicken, and lamb, including rare butcher's cuts. So you can shop like you would at a local butcher by ordering items a la carte. Steaks and chops arrive fresh and never frozen. Now their beef is dry aged, it concentrates the flavor, it's rich, it's awesome, it's great, it's better than what you're gonna find at your local grocery store, I guarantee it. These cows are raised on pasture in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania to extremely high standards. So it's great, great stuff. Then it's dry aged, makes it even better. But if you haven't tried their pork, you need to. I just tried their pork ribs for the first time and I was blown away at the amount of flavor they had inside. I used them for a test out at the Barbecue HQ, and Eric and I were talking about it and we're like, dude, can you believe how good these ribs are? Those pork ribs were incredible. It's because they're not just the regular commodity pork that you buy at the grocery store, and there is a big difference. I promise you that much. Porter Road is my favorite place to order meat. If I want to order something that I know for a fact is going to be delicious and it's going to show up right at my door, I order from Porter Road. It's the most convenient way to get great quality meat. So if you're interested in Porter Road, you can click on the link below and you get 15% off, and any orders over $100 ship free. So if you click on that link, the discount automatically applies and you can get great quality stuff right to your door. So check them out. It's been a couple hours, so let's take a look at how these roasts are doing. I would expect the one I seasoned with a bunch of curing salt just beforehand is going to have some crusty salt on the outside, but let's take a look and see. Now we wait. Okay, we took these roasts to 200 degrees and now we let them rest for a while. So we're gonna cut into them. So the ones that were seasoned on the outside with curing salt are gonna give us a visual clue as to how far that curing salt moved inside the meat before it reached a well-done temperature. But ultimately, we're really concerned about the salt and pepper one. We're gonna use those Salinity Test strips to see how far the salt penetrated, and we're gonna find out if it actually penetrates farther after it's well done or if it stops when it reaches a well-done cooking point. So we're gonna start with the roast that was seasoned with curing salt 2 days beforehand. We're gonna move to the one that was seasoned with curing salt 1 day beforehand, then immediately before, and then the last one we're gonna look at is just salt and pepper. Okay, now it's time to test out the salt and pepper roast. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take those Salinity Test strips, and because of what we know from the curing salt test, the curing salt that was applied immediately before that roast went on the smoker, it penetrated at least 1 inch. So I'm gonna take a reading from the outside inch, and then I'm gonna move halfway toward the center with the next test strip, and then the dead center with the third test strip, and then finally I'm gonna take one of those test strips and run it under tap water so we have kind of a point of reference for all 3 of those. So we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna talk about the results at the end. Okay, very interesting results here. So on these Salinity test strips, there's no real appreciable difference between the outside, halfway to the center, and all the way to the center, which tells me that there's a roughly equal salt distribution from the outside to the inside, which is what I expected. So all that leads me to believe that if you're trying to make a pastrami and you want all the meat to be red, well then yeah, definitely brine that a long time beforehand so that all that salt penetrates all the way through the meat before you begin cooking, because once you reach that well done temperature, that meat turns brown and that red color is not going to be available. So it matters then, but if you're just doing regular barbecue, you can season immediately before it goes on the smoker because it's on there for so long, and then especially if you rest your meat, it's got even more time, that is the salt has more time to penetrate through the meat and kind of reach an equilibrium so that there's not just a salty exterior and a saltless interior. That way you have salt all throughout the meat. So this is my conclusion. If you've been dry brining your barbecue before you put it on the smoker, like the day before, and taking up fridge space with something that can't touch that meat, to me, that's a pain, and it doesn't look like it really changes the results at all. It's possible that it might. I really don't think so. One thing I know for certain is that the salt during the course of a long barbecue cook has enough time to penetrate all the way through the meat. If you're doing steaks, completely different story. Salt them beforehand. It will provide seasoning throughout the meat. But for barbecue, throw your seasoning on, put it on the smoker, and you don't have to worry about it. So in this case, simple is good. It works just fine. No need to salt beforehand. Now, if you guys have honed a technique where you season your barbecue a day or 2 or 3 or 4 days beforehand, that's totally fine. If you have a method that you like or you think it gives you better bark or something like that, that's totally fine. Keep doing it the way that you found to work best. But in terms of salt penetration, it doesn't seem to have a benefit to season your barbecue in the days leading up to when you put it on the smoker. You could do it immediately before, throw it in the smoker, and by the time you're done with your cook, the salt will have penetrated all the way through the meat. Now, if you guys have questions about this or you want to interact with me on this topic, you can follow me on Patreon. It helps support the channel, and it allows me to interact meaningfully with people's questions so I can actually respond in a way that's going to help you out. You can also interact with a bunch of other barbecue nerds who are on the forum there. It's a lot of fun. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience with various different kinds of smokers, so I would definitely suggest checking that out. If you like this video, you can hit the like button down below, and you can also subscribe to the channel if you're interested in seeing more barbecue experiments. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Mad Scientist BBQ. I'll see you guys next time.